Their theory was that because Adam had to name every animal in a single day, that humans were born super intelligent and that we knew everything there ever was to know from day one. And because Adam couldn't possibly teach his children that, we've gotten stupider over time.
Misfits. Did you miss me? This week, I have on another special guest. Gwen grew up in a conservative branch of mainline Protestant Christianity. She went through confirmation and began to realize that she had more questions than answers. After not receiving the answers that she wanted from pastors, family, and fellow church members, she went to a Christian college to see if she could find answers there. Along the way, she came to the realization that she was bi and details her time coming out to her family. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Gwen. Hi, welcome to the Misfits Guide to the Bible, the show where we talk about weird, wonderful, and sometimes highly questionable things that happen in the Christian world. I'm Jonas, and today I'm joined by Gwen. Gwen is a fellow survivor of Sunday school, youth group, and brace yourselves, Christian college. All right, Gwen, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, my name's Gwen, and I grew up in a German Lutheran family in the middle of nowhere. For most of my early childhood, we attended church kind of episodically, and it wasn't until like middle school when I started confirmation class that we all started to go nearly every week. That includes Sunday school, Wednesday night church group, and regular church on Sundays. I was very active in our youth group from about age 10 to 15 or 16. We did lots of trips and lots of fundraising for those trips. I couldn't tell you how much time I spent doing stuff for that. We went to the Lutheran Church, but specifically the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, which of the Lutheran options is the much more conservative branch, which was a problem because I am bisexual and that is very frowned upon in that version of Lutheran churches.
Let's start from the beginning with your church experience. So you mentioned confirmation. So you're the second person that I've had on that's done confirmation. So Alex is Catholic, and so Alex also did confirmation. So what was that experience like going through confirmation?
Yeah, so that's going to be a little bit different than the Catholic experience. From my understanding, the Catholics, they will go to their first communion when they're younger and then take the confirmation classes. For Lutherans, it's typically 1 to 2 years of Wednesday night classes. We did ours directly with the pastor, and they tell you not to describe it like a graduation. But it is exactly like a graduation. You go up in front of the church and you recite some lines from the Bible. And then they tell you, all right, you're considered an adult in the faith and can now take communion. The Lutherans are very selective with who they allow to take communion. If you haven't been confirmed or if you were confirmed in another church, they will not allow you to take part in that.
Okay, that's really interesting. I grew up Baptist, so all of that's like really foreign to me. So I did learn about it in seminary and things like that. But, the real lived experience is much different than that. So the type of church that you went to, are we talking like a mega church, or are we talking like the church where you've got the what kind of church are we talking about?
It is a very small town church. I'm from a small town. We had lots of connections with other Lutheran churches in the area, but on any given Sunday, there were maybe 30 people there, most of them 60 or older, which on one hand, it was very nice because I knew everyone and they were pretty caring. But on the other hand, it forced us to do a lot of things to save face, to bite our tongue like, as a family when questionable things were happening that, it's a small town. If you go to a different church for a Sunday, it's a huge deal. So it kind of kept us in line a little bit.
It's nice having some of those small family churches, but at the same time, churches can be loving up to a certain point, and then gets a little dicey after that.
For sure. My confirmation experience wasn't great. We were supposed to, I think it was a 2-year program, but our pastor held us back for like 3 or 4 months. And it wasn't because we weren't able to grasp the concepts in the catechism, which is Luther's works describing the Bible and like the 95 Thesis and stuff like that. But it was because there was another girl in the class and we would not agree with him on his views of marriage. Or one time he was doing a little devotional before we started, and he was talking about how Christians are always being, I can't remember the word. It starts with a P, where they're always prosecuted. Yeah, persecuted.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. And I was 13 at the time. And I asked him, I'm like, weren't the Nazis Christians? And he did not have an answer. He was quite upset. And he just moved on. But later, my mom caught him talking to some congregation members about how me and this other girl were troublemakers. And he held us back for a few months. And so we were confirmed, I think, in like August, when typically their confirmations are in May.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I guess I didn't know a whole lot about like the actual process of it. I just knew like what you kind of learned and things, and I guess it's different for like Catholics and Lutherans, but that's an interesting story. Yeah, I feel like questions are allowed in the church up to a certain point. And I know a lot of people in the church probably don't know that the Nazis were Christians. Like that the German church was a Nazi church. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I had several questions like that I just did not get answered. And part of that drove me to go to a Christian college later.
I see.
Because
Yeah.
I came to the terms with the fact that the pastor I had either didn't know how to answer my questions, or he wasn't willing to have those conversations. And so I chose to go to a place that I could study the Bible in a more academic way, which was also helpful because going to church at this church, the pastor liked to talk about the same 3 things every sermon.
Yep.
It was about how abortion is bad, gay people are going to hell, and you need to come to church more. And I'm
So
like,
I'm guessing he's a Trump supporter then. Hook, line, and
probably.
sinker.
He's retired since, and my little sister has a whole new pastor, which is hopefully okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it did me well to be able to study the Bible in a different setting, with people who have dedicated their lives to studying it and have PhDs in whatever niche form of theology they had.
Let's talk about Christian college. So you mentioned you had wanted to go to Christian college because you wanted to learn more about the actual theology behind what you supposedly believed. So talk a little bit more about that. What was it like being there? What kind of rules did they have put in place? And what was the craziest rule that you had at that school?
So the rules they put in place, they didn't require you to be a Christian, but they did require you to go to chapel, I think 18 times a semester, which is about an hour long. It was like a little church service. Unwritten rules regarding chapel is you had to pay attention. If you were on your phone or doing homework, I don't know, is head of student life, which is basically an organization on campus affiliated with the administration folk that are in charge of how you behave. If you got in trouble, you got sent to student life and had to go talk to them. And the people of student life would come and walk through the aisles and police you're paying attention. Additionally, they would make you stand during the songs because they would open with songs, like the pop Christian music that's the
Yes.
same 4 lines over and over.
Yes. And the same 4 chords too.
So yeah, you had to stand for that. And it got worse. It wasn't so strict when I first started, but the pastor that was preaching had left and they hired a different guy. Yeah, and things at that college have just gotten so much more strict, even since I've left. Um, but we all had to sign a contract basically saying that we wouldn't drink alcohol, even if you were over 21, that if you were unmarried, you wouldn't have sex, and that if you were gay, they would connect you with therapists, which is their nice way of saying that they would try to send you to conversion
Yeah.
therapy. Which is still in their student code of conduct to this day. Funny thing though, I knew all the therapists because I'm in the psych field,
Mm.
and they said that they would lose their license if they did that, and they refused. So I don't know how the school would have gone about it. Uh, I just basically didn't let the administration know, and I was fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as far as crazy rules go, that
Mhm.
goes for the dorms. We weren't allowed to have alcohol on campus. If you had a member of the opposite sex in your dorm, you had to have a shoe in the door at all times, and it had to be at a certain angle. Yeah, there was one time I was asleep in my bed with my boyfriend at the time,
Mhm.
and the door was wide open, but I forgot to put a shoe in it. So my RA knocked at the door until we woke up because we didn't put a shoe in the door, which I was really frustrated. You know, you're like 20 years old, you are a full-grown adult. You should be able to make those choices for yourself.
Absolutely. I went to a Christian college too. It was a lot less strict than that though. We were an alcohol-free campus, alcohol and tobacco and firearms-free campus. But like they didn't have any rules with like shoes and things like that. That's interesting.
They had to leave the dorms by like 11 on weekdays
Mhm.
and 1 on weekends, except for Mondays. Mondays, they weren't allowed in the dorms at all. Not really sure why, but that was the case. It had some unintended consequences, though, because there was a little lake in town, and I heard of several instances where students would be caught having sex in their cars at the lake.
Like
Um,
caught by the administration or caught by the police.
by the police.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. So I personally think it would have been better to just let the students do what they want in their
I
dorms.
agree. Yeah. I think that's one of the funniest things about growing up Christian is that they put all these rules in place that are so strict that people end up actually harming themselves trying to navigate those rules and try to, I guess, circumnavigate them and get around them. And so that these rules, I, you know, being generous, they're put in place to try to protect people, and they end up having the exact opposite effect. I think that's just really fascinating to look at.
For sure. And in some ways, I think if you're forced to have those rules all your life, you're coddled.
Mhm.
I knew several people that had grown up in such rigid structures, and their parents' way of viewing the world was the only way to view the world, and the rules were meant to be followed all the time. And they were so fragile. They couldn't handle an opposing worldview, um, which I didn't come out all the time like, oh, this is me. Oftentimes I would wait a bit to like build a friendship and then I would. And more than one occasion, people really struggled with that, just because it didn't fit into what their view of correct was.
Mm.
I wonder how deep their friendships can be if everything has to be correct.
Yeah, I know. Because I guess I've had like a lot of experiences where I've heard Christians say like, "Oh, I just don't know how non-Christians can have like a deep friendship with each other and things like that." And I'm like, everybody has to agree with you. So I don't know how you can have a deep friendship because the second somebody doesn't agree with you on every talking point, they're anathema to you. So I just don't understand that.
I think some of the best friendships are built on a little bit of disagreement
Mm.
because you have to be able to respect that that the other person comes from a different place and, work through that.
Yeah, I know. You, if you can't work through disagreement, then you're probably not really friends. Let's talk about youth group fundraisers. So, what are some of those fundraisers that you did growing up?
A lot of them were pretty harmless, and did some good for the community. Every year we would do a big garage sale and we would take donations, or if someone had passed away, we'd help the family clean out the house so they wouldn't have to worry about all the extra stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would sell it very cheaply, and at the end of the day just give furniture and stuff away. I spent a lot of time that was a big year thing every year, but there were some less innocent ones. Luckily, this only happened a couple years, and we were able to convince the youth leaders to stop this. But we had what they called and what they advertised as a slave
Yeah,
auction.
I've heard of that before. Yeah.
Yeah, they would make us go and stand up in front of the congregation, not in the church room, because you can't have any finances going on in the actual, what's the word?
The sanctuary?
In the sanctuary. Yeah, it was in the church basement. We'd stand in front of the congregation and they would bid on us based on how much our work was worth for like 4 hours.
Wow.
Uh-huh. And I think I only did it once. I convinced my mom not to make me do it again. Because I went right after like this big high school guy that, earned like $300 for the church. And I was a pity bid from a grandmother for like $40.
Oh my gosh.
It was awful. That's probably the worst one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did other things like being waitresses and putting on Valentine's dinners. That one was kind of fun. We would be selling stuff constantly in like the room outside the sanctuary. Like wreaths for Christmas and stuff like that. But there was always something going on.
We never did Slave for a Day, which that's just such a wild name. I don't know how that passes. The craziest thing we didn't have a whole lot of crazy fundraisers. We did flocking, which I don't know if you've heard of that. So it's literally getting these little plastic flamingos and going and sticking them in people's yards.
Oh.
And they have to pay to have people come and move them. So that was fun. It was always fun doing that. I look back on my time in church and think that there are a lot of things that the church does well. Like you said, doing auctions and giving away some of the furniture that you have with that kind of stuff. I think that's a really good thing and a really needed thing, especially in like a small community. But then you have on the flip side of that, the slave for a day, slave auction kind of stuff, which is just wild and does not, it takes absolutely zero accountability or gives any thought to the harm that Christians have caused within the slave trade. So that is something that I've always found interesting about that.
What would your church use your funds for? Like when the youth group would raise funds, what would they use that for?
It depends. So we would use it for like mission trips. We went to like youth camp. We would use it for youth camp. I think that's mainly it, actually. So yeah, yet again, like you use all that, or you get all that money, and then it just ends up further perpetuating like church things. And church can often be like a social club or a country club.
It for sure is. Most of our funds were used for youth traveling. We hardly donated to charitable organizations. And we traveled a lot. There were 4 or 5 different like trips every year that all of those funds would go to. And once every 4 years, there's a national youth gathering that costs probably about $1,000 to go to, if you were just paying your whole way there by yourself. But the church covers for most of it. Which on one hand, if your family doesn't have the funds and resources, that can be a good way for the child to be able to see different parts of the country. But on the other hand, not everybody needs that kind of support.
Yep.
My family didn't need to be using those church funds. It could have gone somewhere else.
I know exactly what you mean. My family didn't need the support either. You know, to a certain extent, like we did have some kind of tier where it's like, hey, if you like really need help with this, like come talk to us and we'll figure something out for you. To kind of shift gears a little bit, did you have a favorite Bible story growing up? Did you have a Bible story that you thought was just a really quirky, weird one? What did you what I guess before we get into that, what was your relationship like with the Bible?
I was really at a loss for it for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
While my parents took me to church most of the time, it's not something we talked about at home for a long time. Not until I started confirmation class when I started having questions that I didn't always feel comfortable talking to my pastor about, then I would have those conversations. But my dad didn't grow up in the church. I don't think he converted before he married my mom. And yeah, she's a very hard worker, but she's not super into books. And so she doesn't know a lot of those things, and that's fine. That works for her.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a favorite Bible story
Okay.
growing up. I didn't know a lot of it except for the cherry-picked stories from Sunday school.
Yep.
But in college, we did a whole section on Job in our Old Testament class, which I don't know if it's a favorite story, but it's one that sticks in my head quite a bit.
It's a story for sure. I think Job's a fascinating book, actually. I think it's really interesting. There's a whole lot of nerdy nuances that I could get into about it, but I'll spare you the details on that.
No, I like the nuances. If you want to go on a tangent,
All right.
feel
Yeah,
free.
we can go on a little bit of a tangent, I guess. So, yeah, the one of the most fascinating things that I guess people will kind of it's the first thing that kind of comes to mind whenever you think of Job, which is God and the devil essentially making a bet. And that I don't know what you think about that or what you've heard about that through like church circles and things like that. But
It's not something that was talked about a whole lot. And it's been a while. I took that course my freshman year. We did a project over it, and we basically just talked about what happened. We didn't do a lot of analysis,
okay.
which is unfortunate because God making a bet with the devil makes me feel really icky. If God is supposed to be this all good being, it sounds like he's just doing it for fun. Like, let's just have some entertainment off of this man's life.
Conservative evangelicals just really don't know what the Bible is. This is an ancient text, and it reflects the culture that was writing it and their thoughts and their beliefs. Satan is not really Satan as we think of him in like Christian understanding and mythology. Satan is just a member of this divine council. And that's literally like Satan, we get that from Hasatan, which is just the accuser or the adversary. It's just kind of this idea of somebody who is contending with other people and not necessarily letting them just get off easily. Essentially, like Hasatan is playing the devil's advocate for God. Yeah, that's something that I think is really fascinating that conservative evangelicals just don't understand how rich of a culture this really is that we're taking from, and so often just bastardize it.
It's easier. It doesn't take much time to just do a surface level reading.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't take as much internal dialogue with yourself either.
Yep. Yeah, and because if you don't look at the text that way, you never have to ask yourself, well, should I believe that gay people are going to hell? Should I believe that it's a good thing to deny children school lunch because I don't feel like paying for it? You know, I said this in one of my other videos, but it ends up becoming a Jesus and a scripture that requires absolutely nothing of you except to believe certain things.
Which is definitely not Jesus's thing.
Yeah.
He was a call to action kind of guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you grew up with this. This was kind of a staple of my upbringing, but what was your understanding of like end times theology?
It was not something that was touched
Interesting.
at all. I don't even think I read Revelations until my New Testament course
Hmm.
in college. And that was described to me as a metaphor for the political scape of Rome at the time.
Okay, you had a good New Testament teacher then.
Yeah, my theology professors were amazing. While I had my beefs with the administration, the theology professors, they were cool if you didn't believe and if you came to different conclusions than they had. Although I will say, I went back to church with my family a couple years ago for Christmas. And instead of doing the typical Christmas sermon, he did a sermon on Revelations.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard a Christmas revelation service before.
No, it was really weird, and I don't remember enough about it.
Yeah.
Because I was quite confused because it wasn't lining up with what I'd learned in class.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, the way that Revelation is used is honestly terrible. It's used as this text that is a fear tactic for evangelical children and a justification for Zionism and Christian Zionism. This is something that really bothers me because you see this kind of theology actually have real world implications with what Israel is doing to Gaza and like America's complicity in that, where all of these other nations are willing to bring charges against Netanyahu, and America is sitting here basically saying "Fuck you, international court," like we don't care what you want. And so that, like, you see the real world implications of that kind of theology, and it's gross, honestly.
Yeah. From an individual level, I think it makes Christians, or many Christians, not feel the need to put forth effort into making the world better.
Yeah.
Because they see the signs that they think mean the world is going to end. And so why would you try to make things better? Why would you try to end suffering if it doesn't matter if the world's just going to end now, next week? I don't know. It's kind of a learned helplessness thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it breeds climate science deniers too, because it's like, who cares? Like, even if climate change is real, why should we care? Because God's not going to let that happen. God will restore it, or God will come back before it matters.
Which is wild, because isn't there a passage or a verse in Genesis that talks about humans being the stewards of the earth and charged
Absolutely.
with caring for it?
So Revelation kind of leads us into an interesting topic that I wanted to talk about as well, which is Christians and conspiracy theories. And before this, we talked a little bit about our love for Milo Rossi and his debunking conspiracy theories. So why don't you talk a little bit about that if you want to?
For sure. So I went to a lot of, I think twice every winter, we would go to this little town that had maybe 200 people, and we'd rent out the school gym there, and we'd have a lock-in, and they would have speakers come in. And I heard the wildest shit do you want me to cut?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just
heard
said so it's fine.
I didn't even, but I heard the wildest shit there, and I think part of it is because our parents weren't there to be like, what are you saying to my child? But one time, and this, I didn't care at the time because I was just there to hang with my friends, but their theory was that because Adam had to name every animal in a single day, that humans were born super intelligent and that we knew everything there ever was to know from day one. And because Adam couldn't possibly teach his children that, we've gotten stupider over time. Their physical evidence for this were things called the Baghdad Battery and the Dendera Light.
Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Which I didn't really believe too much of because I had like an Egyptology phase as a child. So I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm gonna go paintballing with my buddies later. It's fine. But I got really into Milo Rossi's stuff, and he did some episodes of Awful Archaeology on those topics. And I was like, wait a minute, I recognize this. And for some background for people who don't know, here, I've got it written out. The Baghdad Battery was one jar in a set of jars that had evidence of an electrolyte in there with a copper tube and like an iron rod and some asphalt. I'm not much of a sciencey, like hard sciencey person. So, but with that setup, it could have been possible to produce 1.1 volts, which is next to nothing.
Yep.
The theory was that this battery powered everything like the Dendera Lights, which, side note, completely different parts of the Middle East. Which, unfortunately, those jars were destroyed in the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we can do much. They were legitimate archaeological finds, but they were taken out of context in the Wild West of archaeology days before they really made an effort to note all of that. And the Dendera Lights are a set of hieroglyphs depicting the Egyptian creation myth, which was the world was born from a lotus flower. Its entire misinterpretation is because it looks like a light bulb. And it's only found in one tomb, and it's one version of it that there's a little snake coming out of this lotus flower, and it looks like the filament. Supposedly, yeah. Yeah. If you've seen pictures, it kind of looks like a dick, actually.
Yeah, very massive dick. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, but so things like that they would just tell us when it was just the kids. And I don't know if like the main church I went to was New Earth creationists, but the people running those youth camps definitely were, which was strange. I would go home and talk to my mom about it, and she's in the science field. She didn't really know what to say. Sometimes she would just tell me like, oh, they're a little weird, and just leave it at that.
I have a personal vendetta against young Earth creationism. It is my mission to make sure that Ken Ham never receives another dollar.
Understandable. Yeah. I know in my confirmation class, he was going on about that. Our pastor was. I don't know if he understood what a metaphor is at all. Because we were trying to argue with him that like, oh, well, maybe we could tie in evolution because maybe a day wasn't actually a day, and it would just meant that, you know, at first there was light from the stars because of the Big Bang. He didn't want to hear it. And a more nitpicky, like, theological thing with communion. So the Catholics typically believe that the bread and the wine turns into flesh and blood. And like Methodists believe it's just a symbol for it. And I don't know how he worded it, but Lutherans kind of toe the line of it's both a symbol and it is actually. And he kept repeating that like there's no other definition for the word is, that it has to mean that this is something else, not to define a word with a word, but like it equals. Yeah.
Things like young Earth creationism, you just see the inability to be able to recognize metaphor in literature. And I see this from people that are incredibly intelligent people that otherwise they could pick up another book and be like, yep, this is a metaphor, this is a metaphor. They know what it is. And yet whenever they see the Bible, it's just like their brain just turns off. And it's like, nope, 24-hour day. It's like, where does it say that? It doesn't say that. Never says that. Christians and conspiracy theories sometimes kind of go hand in hand. Like if you are more prone to taking the Bible literally instead of being able to see the metaphor within it, then I think you're more susceptible to these conspiracy theories.
You would have to be in order to make the world around you make sense. Because otherwise, how else would you explain so many of these things?
Yeah, that's true. You can share as much as you're comfortable with about that, and yeah.
For sure. It took me a while to figure out For me, those feelings started coming around puberty.
Mm.
But it wasn't until I was 16 that I had like the ability to even come out to myself.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's not because I wanted to. I was drugged from the closet, kicking and screaming. Um, I had a friend, a very close friend, and there was no other explanation for some of the feelings I had towards her and some
Yeah.
of the weird actions I had taken. And my friends are like, "Why the hell did you do that?" I'm like, but yeah. So I came out to myself first, and I didn't tell anyone for months
Mm.
because I was convinced I could pray the gay away. It doesn't work. Or I mean, some people live in denial, but I don't know how they could. It was a really dark time in my life before I told anyone. Yeah, I it got to the point where I knew I had to step away from the church because if I didn't know if I would reach adulthood.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, I could not accept that, and I was so afraid that everyone in my life would shun me. The school I went to, there were a few queer kids that were out,
Mm-hmm.
but very few. There were a lot more of them that I found out later, but very few came out, and those that did often faced backlash.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the town I grew up, most people were Christian.
Yeah.
So eventually I started to tell some of my friends
Mm.
individually, and that helped. Their mixture of acceptance, and more than one of them said, "Yeah, we kind of knew," which made me feel better about it, I guess. I don't know. But it took me years to build up the courage to tell my parents because I was convinced that they, in particular, would disown me. When I came out, I was 2 weeks from turning 18. I had had bags stowed away at my best friend's house because her
Mm-hmm.
parents knew, just in case. And I had had it in my mind that they would kick me out. And this is a little context for this. I had a family member get pregnant at 15.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom struggled with that so much and would always talk to me about the dangers of having sex before marriage. And one time in particular, she told me that she didn't know what would be worse, having a pregnant daughter or a gay one. And after seeing her openly struggle so much with this family member that was pregnant, I I just wanted to be safe, to be prepared. I didn't want to ruin my relationship with my parents,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew I had to. Well, honestly, I came out because so I did forensics, which is competitive acting, and it's called program of oral interpretation. It's where you take like poetry, short stories, music, and you make all around a central theme and you make like an overarching story. And it was an outlet for me at the time, and like I had come out to some of my forensics coaches, and they were very accepting and loving. And so I did mine about couples that couldn't be together due to societal expectations or
Mm-hmm.
homophobia or like religious, yeah. And normally my parents didn't go to those tournaments, but my mom wanted to go because it was my senior year. And so I'm like, I have to tell
Yeah.
her before she finds out through this forensics tournament.
Yeah.
And so, being the little dramatic shit that I can be, I was like, all right, I want to practice in front of you guys. And so I sat them down in the living room and gave them the piece and then came out to them, which I don't remember a lot of it. It was all a blur. I know my dad didn't say anything until later, and then he just gave me a hug, which is honestly like what I needed. My mom talked a lot, and she definitely like wanted to know if I had dated a girl before
Mm-hmm.
that, which I hadn't, but I knew who she was referring to when she was asking those
Yeah.
questions. And we haven't talked about it since. It's just something that got swept under the rug.
Yeah.
I went to college, and my roommate was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
She clocked it so quickly. And she's the one that bought me my first pride flag. And it's there that I learned to accept myself a
Mm-hmm.
bit better. By the time I left high school, I'd gotten to the point where I didn't hate that about me, but I definitely wasn't at a point where I was okay with it. But I've come a long way since then, and It's not even something I think about
Yeah.
anymore. It's just part of who I am.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome. I think one of the most interesting things that you mentioned is that your parents have not talked to you about it since then. And I don't know why, but from what I have heard within like the deconstruction, deconversion community is that Christian parents don't really like to talk about those hard things and points of disagreement. I think it just ends up being easier for them to be able to kind of have both, where they can both still have their child and still have their beliefs without having to have those come in conflict with each other.
Yeah. And that's definitely how it was for a while. But it also helped that I was only dating men at the time. And so
Yeah,
they could just ignore it.
right.
But I mean, things get better.
Mm.
My mom, she's on call and she runs her own business and has to, she's worked very hard and has a lot of degrees to do what she does.
Yeah.
And she has been on call for most of my life.
Mm.
She's getting to the point where she didn't want to do that all the time anymore. She needed help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a small community, so she had to recruit from universities in the state. And she couldn't get anyone to come out there except for this lesbian couple. They were the only ones willing to move. And so it's through them that she has seen more of the world and is more accepting. They're both from relatively small farming communities as well. So they get along on a lot of personal levels, which is wonderful. It's weird though. The person I grew up with is not the person she is today, but that's a good thing. My little sister is still in high school. I have no idea. I don't talk to her about that stuff either, but I rest easier knowing that she gets a better version of my parent.
Have you ever dated a woman before?
No.
Okay.
High school was hard. This is the only time I've really fallen for someone, and she was kind of crazy. That's a whole story for another time. But there wasn't, when I was open to dating women, there just wasn't a lot of pickings at the school I went to. There were a few, but they were all theater majors, and so they were very intense. I get the feeling though, if I do ever bring a woman home, that'll open up a lot of cans of worms.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something that I've kind of noticed too, though, is that sometimes it's both like a level of biphobia and like dismissing lesbian sapphic relationships because like with your family it wasn't that big of a deal because you weren't dating a woman at the time, and so it's like that's fine. And like I feel like there are so many lesbian couples that are kind of treated where it's like, oh, that's cute, like you think you're dating and things like that, and it's not really taken that seriously. And I think that's like so terrible.
Yeah, I did a research project on
Did you?
that in undergrad.
Yeah.
I didn't find any statistically significant data, but I had also experienced that where a lot of my gay male friends they experienced a lot more fear in coming out, and a lot more pushback than queer women in my life, which maybe it was like the first research project I'd ever done, so maybe I definitely know I could have written my questions a lot better and stuff, but that's also something I have, at least in my personal life, noticed.
Gwen, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate your time, and I'd love to have you back on if you'd like to come.
Thanks, I'd be so open to that.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next time. Peace. That's all I have for you today. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below to tell me about any experiences that you might have had going to Christian college, participating in cringy, sometimes highly insensitive fundraisers, or coming out within the church. Have a great day. Peace.